cursed island whispers your name in the dark, its screams echoing through the fog. Dare to uncover its secrets, or become part of its nightmare. On a forgotten shore where the sea meets a jagged cliff, Ellie and Sam find an old book filled with strange symbols and tales of an island that screams at night. Drawn by a chilling pull, they step onto its haunted sands, where shadows with too many arms lurk in the mist and a lighthouse hides cosmic horrors. Each step deeper into the island's heart through stone circles, hidden caves, and a ritual that demands blood brings them closer to the Watchers, ancient beings from beyond the stars. As the island's song grows louder, will they silence its screams, or will the void claim them forever? Chapter 1. Whispers from the dark shore. The boat rocked gently on the black water, its wooden sides creaking like an old man's bones. Ellie gripped the edge of the seat, her knuckles white as the wind tugged at her hair. The sea was quiet tonight. Too quiet, and the air felt heavy, like it was holding its breath. She squinted at the horizon where the island waited. It was just a dark shape against the starry sky, jagged and sharp, like a broken tooth sticking out of the ocean's mouth. Somewhere deep inside her, a small voice begged her to turn back, but she couldn't, not now. Her brother, Sam, sat across from her, his face pale in the moonlight. He was 16, 2 years older than Ellie, but he looked younger tonight, his eyes wide and nervous. He clutched a worn notebook, its pages stuffed with maps and scribbled notes about the island. Sam was the reason they were here. He'd been obsessed with the place ever since he found that old book in the attic. The one with the strange symbols and stories about an island that screamed at night. Ellie thought it was just a spooky tale at first, something to scare kids, around a campfire, but Sam believed it was real. And when he got an idea in his head, there was no stopping him. "Ellie, you hear that?" Sam whispered, leaning forward. His voice was shaky, like he was trying to sound brave but failing. Ellie tilted her head, listening. The only sounds were the slap of waves against the boat and the low hum of the motor. Their guide, old Tom, stood at the back, steering them toward the island. His face was hidden under a wide hat, and he hadn't said a word since they left the mainland. Ellie didn't trust him, but he was the only one willing to take them. Everyone else in the village had laughed or shaken their heads when Sam asked about the island. "Nobody goes there," they'd said. "Not if they want to come back." "I don't hear anything," Ellie said, pulling her jacket tighter around her. The night was cold, and the salty air stung her cheeks. "You're just spooked." Sam frowned, his fingers tapping the notebook. "It's out there, Ellie. I know it. The book said the island calls to people. It whispers." Ellie rolled her eyes. "You and that dumb book. It's probably just some old fisherman's story." But even as she said it, a chill crawled up her spine. The island was closer now, its cliffs looming like dark giants against the sky. She could make out twisted trees clinging to the rocks, their branches bent like claws reaching for the stars. And then she heard Eta faint sound, like a sigh carried on the wind. It wasn't loud, but it made her heart skip. She glanced at Sam, hoping he hadn't noticed, but his eyes were locked on the island, his face lit up with a mix of fear and excitement. "Did you hear it?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Ellie swallowed hard. "It's just the wind," she said, but she wasn't sure she believed it. Old Tom cut the motor, and the boat drifted toward a small, rocky beach. The waves hissed as they licked the shore, and the air grew thicker, like it was pressing down on them. Ellie's stomach twisted. She didn't want to get off the boat, but Sam was already standing, slinging his backpack over his shoulder, Come on, he said, his voice sharper now. We're here. Old Tom finally spoke, his voice rough like gravel. I'll wait here till dawn. If you're not back by then, I'm leaving. Don't care what you find out there. Ellie glared at him. You're supposed to help us. The old man's eyes glinted under his hat. I brought you here. That's more than most would do. Whatever's on that island, it ain't friendly. You hear the screams. You run. Understand? Ellie wanted to argue, but Sam was already climbing out of the boat, his boots crunching on the pebbles. She sighed and followed, her heart pounding. The beach was narrow, squeezed between the sea and a wall of cliffs. The rocks were slick with seaweed, and the air smelled of salt and something else, something sour, like rotting fruit. Ellie's flashlight beam danced across the ground, catching glints of shells and strange twisted shapes in the sand. She stopped, her breath catching. The shapes looked like footprints, but they were wrong, too long, too thin, with too many toes. Sam, look at this, she said, pointing. He crouched beside her, his flashlight joining hers. Weird, he muttered. Maybe it's just the tide messing with the sand. Ellie didn't think so, but she didn't say anything. She stood, brushing her hands on her jeans, and followed Sam toward a narrow path that wound up the cliff. The island felt alive, like it was watching them. The wind carried that strange sighing sound again, louder now, and Ellie's skin prickled. She wanted to grab Sam's arm and drag him back to the boat, but he was already moving, his eyes fixed. On the path ahead, the trail was steep and rocky, lined with gnarled bushes that seemed to twist away from the wind. Ellie's flashlight caught glimpses of strange carvings on the rock spirals and jagged lines that made her head hurt if she looked too long. Sam stopped to sketch one in his notebook, his pencil scratching quickly. These are old, he said, his voice full of wonder. The book mentioned symbols like this. They're supposed to mean something, like a warning or a map. A warning to stay away, maybe, Ellie muttered. She didn't like how the carvings seemed to shift. In the light, like they were moving when she wasn't looking, they climbed higher. The path opening onto a flat stretch of land covered in tall, dry grass. In the distance, Ellie saw a circle of stones, tall and black against the starry sky. They looked like giant fingers pointing upward, and something about them made her chest tighten. The air was colder here, and the sighing sound had turned into a low hum, like a faraway song with no words. Sam, I don't like this, Ellie said, her voice small. We should go back. He turned to her, his face stubborn. We're not turning back now. We're so close. The book said there's something here, something big. Don't you want to know what it is? Ellie didn't. She wanted to be back. Home, curled up in her bed with a book, far away from this creepy island. But Sam's eyes were bright with that wild look he got when he was chasing something impossible. She couldn't leave him here alone. Fine, she said, crossing her arms. But if we die, I'm blaming you. He grinned, but it was a nervous grin, not his usual cocky one. They walked toward the stone circle, the grass crunching under their feet. The hum grew louder, vibrating in Ellie's chest like a drum. She noticed something strange. The stars above the stone circle didn't look right. They were too bright, too close, like they were falling toward the island. She blinked, and for a moment she thought she saw them move, swirling like water, circling a drain. Sam, the stars, she started. But he was already at the edge of the circle, his flashlight sweeping across the stones. Each one was carved with more of those weird symbols, and some had deep scratches, like giant claws had raked across them. In the center of the circle was a flat stone, smooth and black, like a table. It looked wrong, like it didn't belong. To the rest of the island, Ellie's stomach churned just looking at it. Sam stepped into the circle, and the hum stopped. The silence was worse, heavy and thick, like the world was holding its breath. Ellie froze, her flashlight shaking in her hand. "Sam, get out of there," she whispered. He didn't listen. He walked to the center stone, his hand reaching out to touch it. "It's warm," he said, his voice strange, like he was talking in his sleep. "Ellie, come feel this." "No way," she said, backing up. "Sam, something's wrong. We need to go." But before he could answer, the ground shook. It wasn't a big quake, just a tremble, but it made Ellie's heart leap into her throat. The hum started again, louder, angrier, like a swarm of bees trapped in the air. The stars above the circle twisted faster, and Ellie swore she saw shapes. In them faces, maybe, or hands reaching down. She grabbed Sam's arm, yanking him back. "Sam, now," she shouted. He stumbled, his eyes wide, like he'd just woken up. The hum turned into a screamer, horrible piercing sound that made Ellie's ears ache and her knees buckle. It wasn't human. It wasn't anything she'd ever heard before. It came from everywhere and nowhere, echoing off the cliffs and the sea, filling the night with terror. They ran. Ellie's flashlight bounced wildly, the beam catching glimpses of the path as they stumbled down the cliff. The scream followed them, growing louder, sharper, like it was chasing them. Ellie's heart pounded so hard she thought it would burst. She didn't dare look back, afraid of what she might see. Sam was right behind her, his breath ragged, his notebook clutched to his chest. They reached the beach, their boots slipping on the wet rocks. Old Tom was still there, standing by the boat, his face unreadable. "Told you," he said, his voice flat. "Get in." Ellie and Sam scrambled into the boat, their hands shaking. The scream faded as the motor roared to life, but it still echoed in Ellie's head, like it had carved itself into her bones. She looked back at the island, its dark shape shrinking as they sped away. The stars above it were normal again, just pinpricks of light in the sky. But Ellie knew what she'd seen, and she knew they'd barely escaped. Sam was quiet, his face pale, his notebook open on his lap. Ellie glanced at it and saw a new, sketchier spiral with eyes in the center, staring out from the page. She shivered and looked away. "What was that?" she whispered, her voice barely audible over the motor. Sam didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice was low, almost lost in the wind. "I don't know, but we have to go back." Ellie stared at him, her heart sinking. She wanted to scream, to tell him he was crazy, that they were never setting foot on that island again. But deep down, she knew he was right. Whatever was there, whatever had screamed, it wasn't done with them. And they weren't done with it. Boat cut through the dark water, carrying them back to the mainland. But the island's shadow stayed with them, whispering in the dark. Chapter 2. The fog that hides the stars. Lee couldn't sleep. The scream from the island echoed in her head all night, sharp and cold, like a knife. She lay in her bed, staring at the ceiling of their small rented room in the village. The walls were thin, and she could hear Sam turning pages in his notebook next door, his pencil scratching like a restless bug. He hadn't stopped since they got back from the island, scribbling notes and sketching those creepy symbols. Ellie wanted to burn that notebook, but she knew it wouldn't stop him. Nothing ever did when Sam got an idea. The morning came slow, grey light creeping through the window. Ellie dragged herself out of bed, her eyes heavy and her stomach knotted. She found Sam at the kitchen table, his notebook open, surrounded by crumpled papers and half-empty mugs of tea. He looked like he hadn't slept either, his hair messy and his face pale. The sketch of the spiral, with eyes stared up from the page, and Ellie turned away, her skin crawling. "You look awful," she said, grabbing a piece of bread from the counter. Sam didn't look up. "I found something in the book," he said, his voice low and urgent. "About the scream. It's not just a sound, it's alive." Ellie froze, the bread halfway to her mouth. "What do you mean, alive?" He flipped to a page in the old book he'd found in the attic. It was tattered, the pages yellow and smelling of dust. The words were written in tight, spidery handwriting, and there were drawings of the island, the stone circle, and those weird symbols. Sam pointed to a passage. "It says the scream comes from something old, something that's been on the island forever. It's tied to the stars somehow." Ellie frowned, leaning over to read. The words were hard to follow, full of strange phrases like the voice of the void and the watchers beyond. It sounded like nonsense, but after last night, she wasn't so sure. "So, what? You think some monster is screaming out there?" "Not a monster," Sam said, his eyes bright with that wild look again. "Something bigger, something cosmic." Ellie rolled her eyes, but her heart wasn't in it. She couldn't shake the memory of the stars swirling over the stone circle, or the way the scream had made her feel like it was pulling her apart from the inside. "Whatever it is, we're not going back," she said, trying to sound firm. "We almost died, Sam." He didn't answer, just kept scribbling in his notebook. Ellie sighed and sat down, picking at her bread. The village outside was quiet, the streets empty except for a few fishermen heading to the docks. Nobody here talked about the island. When Ellie and Sam had come back last night, pale and shaking, the innkeeper had just shaken her head and muttered something about full kids. Nobody asked what they'd seen. Nobody wanted to know, but Ellie couldn't let it go. She kept seeing the footprints on the beach, those long, thin shapes with too many toes, and the stone circle with its warm, black table that didn't belong. She wanted to forget it all, but Sam's obsession was like a hook in her brain, pulling her back to the island whether she liked it or not. "We need to talk to someone," Sam said suddenly, slamming his notebook shut. "Someone who knows about the island. The book mentions a name of Despi. It says he was a fisherman who went to the island and came back. He might still be here," Ellie groaned. "Sam, nobody's gonna talk to us. You saw how everyone acted. When we asked about the island, they think we're crazy." "Then we'll find him ourselves," Sam said, standing up. "Come on, Ellie. We can't just sit here." She wanted to argue, but the look in his eyes stopped her. He wasn't going to give up, and she couldn't let him go alone. Not after what they'd heard. "Fine," she muttered, grabbing her jacket. "But if this Eldersby guy is as creepy as old Tom, I'm out." The village was small, just a cluster of stone houses huddled against the sea. The air smelled of fish and salt, and a thick fog was rolling in from the water, hiding the horizon. Ellie pulled her jacket tighter, her boots crunching on the gravel as they walked. The fog made everything feel smaller, like the world was shrinking around them. She couldn't see the island, but she felt it out there, waiting. They asked around, at the docks, but the fishermen just shook their heads or ignored them. One old man with a face like cracked leather spat on the ground when Sam mentioned the island. "Stay away from that place," he growled. "Ain't nothing good there." Finally, A woman at the market pointed them to a tiny house at the edge of the village. "Eldersby's there," she said, her voice low. "But he don't talk much. Not since he came back." The house was more like a shack, its roof sagging and its windows boarded up. Ellie's stomach twisted as they approached. The fog was thicker here, curling around the house like fingers. Sam knocked on the door, and for a long moment, nothing happened. Then it creaked open, revealing a man who looked as old as the cliffs. His face was lined and grey, his eyes cloudy like dirty glass. He wore a tattered coat, and his hands shook as he gripped the doorframe. "What do you want?" he rasped, his voice barely louder than the wind. "I'm Sam, and this is Ellie," Sam said, holding up his notebook. "We read about you in a book. It said you went to the island." Eldersby's eyes narrowed, and for a moment, Ellie thought he'd slammed the door. But he didn't. He stared at them, his gaze flicking between Sam's notebook and Ellie's face. "You been there," he said, not a question. "I can see it on you. The island marks you." Ellie's skin prickled. "We didn't stay long," she said quickly. "We heard something, a scream." Eldersby's face didn't change, but his hands shook harder. "Come in," he said, stepping back. "But don't expect me to save you." The inside of the shack was dark and cramped, smelling of damp wood and old fish. A single lantern hung from the ceiling, casting flickering shadows on the walls. Eldersby sat on a rickety chair, gesturing for them to sit on a bench. Ellie hesitated, then sat, her hands clenched in her lap. Sam opened his notebook, ready to write. "You heard the scream," Eldersby said, his voice low. "That means it knows you're here. It'll call you back." "What is it?" Sam asked, leaning forward. The book said it's tied to the stars, but it didn't explain. Eldersby laughed, a dry, bitter sound. "The stars," he said, shaking his head. "You think you can understand it with your little book? That island ain't just dirt and rock. It's alive, and it's hungry. The scream is its voice, calling to the things that live in the dark between the stars." Ellie's heart pounded. "What things?" she asked, her voice small. Eldersby's eyes locked on hers, and she wished she hadn't asked. "Things that don't belong here," he said. "Things that watch and wait. The island's their door, and the scream is their key. I went there years ago. Thought I could fish those waters, make some money, but I heard it too. Saw things in the fog shapes that weren't human, weren't anything. They followed me back, in my dreams. Still do." Sam scribbled furiously, but Ellie just stared at the old man. His words made her feel cold, like the fog had slipped inside her bones. "Why didn't you leave?" she asked. "Move somewhere else." Eldersby's mouth twisted. "You don't leave the island. It don't let you. Once it marks you, it's in your blood, you'll see." Ellie wanted to run, to drag Sam out of this creepy shack and back to the mainland. But Sam was already asking more questions, his voice eager. "The book mentioned a ritual," he said. "Something about the stone circle. Do you know what it is?" Eldersby's face darkened. "Don't go looking for that," he snapped. "The circle's no place for kids. You touch those stones. You wake things up. Things that don't sleep easy. But what's the ritual for?" Sam pressed. The old man stood, his chair scraping against the floor. "Get out," he said, his voice hard. "I told you enough. You go back to that island. You won't come back. Not whole, anyway." Ellie grabbed Sam's arm, pulling him toward the door. "Come on," she said, her heart racing. Sam protested, but she didn't let go until they were outside, the fog swallowing the shack behind them. The air was colder now, and the village felt emptier, like the fog had eaten it too. "He knows more than he's saying," Sam said, flipping through his notebook as they walked. "We need to find out about that ritual. Are you crazy?" Ellie snapped, stopping in the street. "Did you hear him? That island's dangerous, Sam. We're not going back." He looked at her, his face stubborn. "We have to, Ellie. You felt it last night. There's something out there, something big. If we don't figure it out, it's gonna keep calling us." Ellie wanted to scream, to tell him he was wrong, but deep down, she knew he wasn't. The island was in her head now, its scream echoing in her dreams. She looked out at the sea, hidden by the fog, and felt a pull, like a hand tugging at her heart. The stars were gone, swallowed by the mist, but she knew the island was still there, waiting. That night, the fog grew thicker, curling around the village like a living thing. Ellie lay in bed, listening to the silence. Then she heard it a faint whisper, like the sigh from the island, but closer, coming from the window. She sat up, her heart pounding, and peered into the fog. For a moment, she thought she saw something, a shape, tall and thin, with too many arms. It was gone before. She could be sure, but the whisper stayed, calling her name. Chapter 3. Shadows in the Stone Circle. Lee's hands shook as she pulled the curtains shut, blocking out the fog and whatever she thought she'd seen. Her heart thumped so loud she was sure Sam could hear it through the wall. The whisper lingered. In her ears, her name spoken in a voice that wasn't human, low and scratchy like wind over broken glass. She wanted to run to Sam's room, to tell him they were leaving this creepy village and never coming back. But she knew he wouldn't listen. He was too deep in this, too caught up in the island's secrets. She didn't sleep. Every creak of the old inn made her jump. Every gust of wind sounded like that whisper again. By morning, her eyes were heavy, and her head felt foggy, like the mist had crawled inside her. She found Sam in the kitchen, his notebook open. Pages filled with sketches of the stone circle and notes from Eldersby's warnings. He looked worse than she felt, his face pale, dark circles under his eyes. "You heard it, didn't you?" he said, not looking up from his notebook. Ellie's stomach twisted. "Heard what?" she said, trying to sound normal, but her voice cracked. Sam's eyes met hers, sharp and knowing. The whisper, it called my name last night. Out in the fog, she wanted to lie, to say it was just the wind, but the words stuck in her throat. "Yeah," she admitted, sitting down. "It said my name, too." Sam's face lit up, not with fear, but with excitement. "That's it, Ellie. It's calling us back. The island wants us to find something. Or it wants to eat us," Ellie snapped, crossing her arms. "You heard Eldersby. That place isn't safe. We should leave, Sam. Today." He shook his head, flipping to a page in his notebook. "We can't. Look at this." He pointed to a sketch of the stone circle, with notes scribbled around it. "The book says the circle is a gate, Ellie. A gate to something else. The scream, the whispers, it's all connected. If we don't figure out what's going on, it'll follow us. You want that thing whispering your name every night." Ellie shivered, the memory of the voice making her skin crawl. "So what? You want to go back? After what happened?" "Not yet," Sam said, his voice steady. "We need to know more. Eldersby mentioned a ritual, right? If we can find out what it is, maybe we can stop the whispers, or at least understand them." Ellie didn't like it, but she couldn't argue. The island was in her head now, its voice clawing at her thoughts. She didn't want to go back, but she didn't want to spend the rest of her life hearing that whisper either. "Fine," she said, her voice tight. "But how do we find out about this ritual? Eldersby practically threw us out." Sam grinned, a spark of his old self coming through. "The library. Every village has one, right? Maybe they've got something about the island, old records, stories, anything." The village library was a tiny building tucked behind the market, its windows dusty and its door creaking like it hadn't been opened in years. The librarian, a woman with grey hair and glasses so thick they made her eyes look huge, barely glanced at them as they walked in. The air smelled of old paper and mildew, and the shelves were crammed with books that looked like they'd been forgotten for decades. Ellie followed Sam as he scanned the shelves, pulling out anything that looked promising. Most of the books were about fishing or village history, but Sam found a thin, leather-bound book hidden behind a stack of fishing logs. Its cover was blank, the pages brittle and yellow. He opened it carefully, and Ellie leaned over his shoulder, her heart racing. The book was written in the same spidery handwriting as Sam's attic find, but this one had drawings, 2 sketches of the stone circle, the cliffs, and strange, shadowy shapes with too many limbs. One page showed a figure standing in the circle, arms raised, with stars swirling above like a storm. The words were hard to read, but Ellie caught phrases like "the gate opens" and "the watchers answer." "This is it," Sam whispered, his voice shaking with excitement. "It's about the ritual. It says you need to stand in the circle at midnight, under a new moon. There's something about blood and words you have to say, but it's not clear." "Blood?" Ellie's voice rose, and the librarian shot her a look. She lowered it, glaring at Sam. "No way, Sam. I'm not cutting myself for some creepy island magic." "It might not mean actual blood," he said, but he didn't sound sure. "Maybe it's symbolic, like a sacrifice or something. We need to know more." Ellie wanted to grab the book and throw it into the sea, but she couldn't. The whispers, the scream, the weird stars, they were real, and ignoring them wouldn't make them go away. "Okay," she said, her voice barely a whisper, "but we're not doing anything stupid. Not yet." Sam nodded, but his eyes were on the book, not her. They spent the rest of the day in the library, reading every page, copying notes, and sketching the drawings. The more Ellie read, the worse she felt. The book talked about the island like it was alive, a place where the walls between worlds were thin. It said the stone circle was built to hold something back, but the ritual could open it or close it for good. There were warnings too, about what happened if the ritual went wrong. "The watchers will come," one line said, "and they do not forgive." By the time they left the library, the fog was thicker, the village streets swallowed in white. Ellie's head was full of the book's words, and her heart felt heavy, like it was sinking into the sea. They walked back to the inn in silence, the fog curling around them like it was alive. Ellie kept her eyes on the ground, afraid to look up in case she saw that shape again, the tall, thin thing with too many arms. That night, Sam convinced her to go back to the island. "We don't have to do the ritual," he said, packing his backpack with the notebook, the book, and a flashlight. "We just need to see the circle again. Maybe there's something we missed." Ellie didn't want to go, but the whispers were louder now, calling her name every time she closed her eyes. She couldn't stay here, hiding in the inn, pretending everything was fine. So she followed Sam to the docks, where old Tom was waiting, his boat rocking in the foggy water. "You're fools," he said, his voice rough, "but I'll take you. Same deal back by dawn, or I'm gone." The trip to the island was worse. This time, the fog was so thick Ellie could barely see Sam sitting across from her. The sea was calm, but the air felt heavy, like it was pressing down on her chest. The island appeared suddenly, its cliffs cutting through the mist like a knife. Ellie's heart pounded as they stepped onto the beach, the same sour smell of rot filling her nose. The footprints were still there, deeper now, like something heavy had walked across the sand. They climbed the path to the stone circle, their flashlights cutting through the fog. The air was colder here, and the hum was back, low and steady, vibrating in Ellie's bones. The circle loomed ahead, the stones black and silent, their carvings glinting in the light. Ellie stopped at the edge, her feet refusing to move. "Sam, I don't like this," she said, her voice shaking. "It feels wrong." He didn't answer. He was already in the circle, his flashlight sweeping across the stones. "Look at this," he said, pointing to a carving they hadn't noticed before. It was a spiral, bigger than the others, with eyes etched into it, dozens of them, staring out like they were alive. Ellie's stomach churned. "Sam, get out of there," she said, stepping forward, but before she could reach him, the hum turned into a scream, sharp and loud, ripping through the air. The fog swirled, and shadows moved in it, tall and thin, with arms that bent in ways they shouldn't. Ellie froze, her flashlight shaking in her hand. The shadows didn't come closer, but they were there, watching, their eyes glowing like the stars above. Sam stumbled back, his face pale. "Ellie, run," he shouted. They ran, the scream chasing them down the path. The shadows moved in the fog, always just out of sight, their whispers mixing with the scream. Ellie's legs burned, her breath coming in gasps as they reached the beach. Old Tom was there, his boat ready, his face grim. "Told you," he said as they scrambled in. "You woke something up." The boat sped away, the island fading into the fog. But the scream followed them, fainter but still there, echoing in Ellie's head. She looked at Sam, his face white, his notebook clutched to his chest. The fog hid the stars, but she felt them watching, waiting for her to come back. Chapter 4. The unseen choir of midnight. Ellie's hands wouldn't stop shaking, even hours after they'd left the island. The scream lingered in her ears, sharp and cold, like it had carved a home in her skull. She sat on the edge of her bed, in the inn, staring at the floor, trying to block out the memory of those shadows in the fog, tall, thin, with arms that twisted like branches in a storm. Sam was in his room, probably hunched over his notebook, scribbling like nothing had happened, but something had happened. The island wasn't just a place anymore. It was alive, and it wanted them. She hadn't wanted to go back, but Sam's stubbornness was like a tide, pulling her along no matter how hard she fought. Now, after seeing those shadows, she felt like the island had marked her, just like Eldersby said. The whispers hadn't stopped either. They came at night, soft and sneaky, saying her name in that scratchy, not human voice. Last night, she'd woken up sweating, the whisper so close it felt like it was in the room with her. A knock on the door made her jump. "Ellie, you awake?" Sam's voice was muffled but urgent. She sighed, rubbing her eyes. "Yeah, what do you want?" he pushed. The door opened, his notebook tucked under his arm. His hair was a mess, and his eyes were bright, like he'd found something new to chase. "I figured something out," he said, sitting on the chair by her bed. "About the ritual. The book from the library, it's got more details." Ellie's stomach twisted. "Sam, no. We're not going back. Did you see those things in the fog? They weren't just shadows. They were something else. I know, he said, his voice softer. I'm scared too, but the whispers, Ellie, they're not gonna stop. You heard Eldersby. The island's in us now. We can't just walk away. She wanted to argue, to tell him he was crazy, but deep down, she knew he was right. The island wasn't done with them. It was like a hook in her chest, tugging her back to that stone circle, to the scream and the stars that didn't look right. So what's in the book? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Sam opened his notebook, showing her a page filled with his messy handwriting and a sketch of the spiral with eyes. The rituals about talking to the Watchers, he said. That's what the book calls them, Watchers. They're not from here, not from our world. The stone circle is like a door, and the ritual opens it. But it can also close it, if you do it right. Close it. Ellie leaned forward, her heart racing. You mean we can stop the screams, the whispers? Maybe, Sam said, but he didn't sound sure. The book says you need 3 things: blood, words, and the right time. It has to be midnight, under a new moon, like we read before. The blood's not a lot, just a drop, I think. And the words, they're in the book, but they're in some old language. I copied them down, but I don't know how to say them. Ellie's skin prickled. Blood and weird words. Sam, this sounds like bad news. What if we mess it up? Eldersby said the Watchers don't forgive. Sam's face was stubborn. We won't mess it up. We'll practice, and we don't have to do it yet. We can go back to the island, just to look. Maybe the circle will tell us something. Ellie stared at him, her chest tight. She didn't want to go back, didn't want to see those shadows again or hear that scream. But the whispers were getting louder, and she was tired of being afraid. Okay, she said finally, but we're not doing any ritual until we know exactly what it does. Promise me. Sam nodded, but his eyes were already back on his notebook, like he was halfway to the island in his mind. They waited until night, when the village was quiet and the fog was thin. Old Tom was at the docks, as always, his boat rocking in the dark water. He didn't say anything this time, just gave them a long look before starting the motor. Ellie's stomach churned as they crossed the sea, the island's black shape growing closer. The air was cold, and the stars were hidden behind clouds, like they were too scared to show themselves. The beach was the same rocky, with that sour smell of rot and those creepy footprints in the sand. Ellie's flashlight caught them again, and they looked fresher, like something had walked here since last night. She grabbed Sam's arm. Look at those, she whispered. They're new. Sam crouched, his flashlight sweeping over the prints. They're the same as before, he said, his voice tight. Too many toes. Whatever made them, it's still here. Ellie's heart pounded, but she followed him up the path to the stone circle. The hum was there, low and steady, like a heartbeat in the air. The fog was gone tonight, but the darkness felt heavier, pressing down on her shoulders. The stones loomed ahead, their carvings glinting like eyes in the flashlights. Beam. Ellie stopped at the edge of the circle, her feet rooted to the ground. Sam, I don't want to go in, she said, her voice shaking. It feels wrong. He turned to her, his face pale but determined. We have to. The answers are in there. I can feel it. Before she could argue, he stepped into the circle. The hum got louder, vibrating in Ellie's chest. She clenched her fists, her flashlight shaking, and followed him. The air inside the circle was colder, like stepping into a freezer. The stones seemed to lean inward, their shadows twisting on the ground like living things. Sam walked to the center, where the black stone table sat. He ran his hand over it, his face curious. "It's warm again," he said, "like last time. And listen, do you hear that?" Ellie tilted her head, her heart racing. The hum was different now, layered with faint voices, like a choir singing far away. They weren't words she could understand, but they made her skin crawl, like they were pulling at her thoughts. "Sam, we need to go," she said, her voice barely a whisper. But he was already kneeling by the table, his notebook open, copying a new carving, a spiral with lines that looked like arms reaching out. "This is it," he said, his voice excited. "This is part of the ritual. The book said the circle sings when it's ready." "Sings." Ellie's voice rose. "That's not singing, Sam. That's something else." The voices grew louder, weaving together into a sound that wasn't music, but wasn't screaming either. It was like the island itself was talking, its voice made of whispers and hums and something darker. Ellie's flashlight flickered, and for a moment she thought she saw shapes in the shadows, thin, with eyes that glowed like the carvings. They didn't move, but they were there, watching from the edges of the circle. "Sam, now," she shouted, grabbing his arm. He stumbled, dropping his pencil, but he didn't fight her. They ran, the voices following them, rising into a wail that wasn't quite the scream, but close enough to make Ellie's heart pound. The stones seemed to lean closer as they passed, their carvings glowing faintly, like they were awake. The path down the cliff was a blur, their flashlights bouncing, their boots slipping on the rocks. Old Tom was waiting, his face grim. "You're pushing your luck," he said as they climbed into the boat. "Next time, you might not come back." The motor roared, and the island shrank behind them, its stones hidden in the dark. But the voices didn't stop. They were fainter, but Ellie could still hear them, singing in her head, calling her back. She looked at Sam, his face white, his notebook clutched tight. He didn't say anything, but she knew what he was thinking. The island wasn't done with them, and they weren't done with it. Back at the inn, Ellie lay awake, the choir song stuck in her mind. She closed her eyes, and the shadows were there, waiting in the dark, their eyes glowing like stars. She knew they'd have to go back, ritual or no ritual. The island was calling, and its song was louder than ever. Chapter 5. Beneath the weeping cliffs, Sally's dreams were full of the island's song, a haunting hum that twisted into whispers calling her name. She woke up gasping, her heart racing, the inn's creaky walls closing in around her. The room was dark, the only light a faint grey seeping through the curtains. It was early morning, but the village felt like it was still asleep, smothered by the heavy fog that never seemed to lift. She rubbed her eyes, trying to shake the feeling that the island was watching her. Even here, miles away across the sea, Sam was already up, sitting at the kitchen table with his notebook spread out. Papers were scattered everywhere, covered in sketches of the stone circle, the spiral with eyes, and new drawings of the shadowy shapes they'd seen in the fog. His face was pale, his eyes red from lack of sleep, but he was focused, like the island had him under a spell. "You look like you saw a ghost," Ellie said, grabbing a mug and filling it with cold tea from the pot. Her voice sounded tired, even to her. Sam didn't look up. "I found something new," he said, his finger tracing a sketch of the cliffs they'd run past last night. "The book mentions caves under the island, beneath the cliffs. It says they're part of the ritual, like a hidden piece of the puzzle. Caves." Ellie's stomach dropped. "Sam, we're not going into some creepy caves. We barely got out of that circle alive." He finally looked at her, his eyes burning with that stubborn spark. "Ellie, we can't stop now. The whispers, the song, they're getting worse. You heard it last night, didn't you? The choir." She shivered, the memory of the voices crawling up her spine. They weren't just in her dreams anymore. They followed her into the waking world, faint but always there, like a shadow she couldn't shake. "Yeah, I heard it," she admitted, sitting down across from him. "But caves, that's a whole new level of stupid." Sam flipped to a page in the old book from the library, pointing to a passage written in that spidery handwriting. "It says the caves hold the island's heart," he read. "Something about a chamber where the watcher's voices are strongest. If we can find it, maybe we can figure out how to stop the whispers, or at least understand what they want." Ellie stared at the page, her heart sinking. The drawing next to the passage showed a jagged cliff with a dark opening at its base, and inside, more of those creepy symbols, spiraling inward like a whirlpool. "What if it's a trap?" she asked. "Eldersby said the island marks you. Maybe it's luring us down there too. I don't know, eat us or something." Sam's face softened, but only for a moment. "I'm scared too," he said. "But we're in this, Ellie. We can't just go home and pretend it's over. The island's not gonna let us." She hated that he was right. The whispers, the song, the shadows, they were part of her now, like a stain she couldn't wash out. She sighed, running a hand through her hair. "Fine, but we're not doing anything crazy. We find the caves, we look, and we get out. No rituals, no blood, nothing." Sam nodded, but his eyes were already back on the book, like he was halfway to the island. Ellie felt a chill, knowing she'd follow him no matter how much her gut screamed to stay away. They waited until dusk, when the village was quiet and the fog was thin enough to see the sea. Old Tom was at the docks, as always, his boat bobbing in the dark water. He didn't say a word this time, just gave them a look that said he thought they were doomed. Ellie didn't argue. She felt doomed too. The trip across the sea was silent, the air heavy with the smell of salt and that sour rot that clung to the island. The cliffs loomed out of the fog, their jagged edges like teeth against the sky. Ellie's flashlight shook in her hand as they stepped onto the beach, the footprints still there, deeper and fresher, like something had been pacing while they were gone. Sam led the way, his flashlight cutting through the dark as they skirted the base of the cliffs. The book had mentioned a cave hidden behind a pile of rocks, where the waves crashed hardest. Ellie's boots slipped on the wet stones, and the sea roared beside them, spitting foam like an angry beast. The hum was back, faint but growing, vibrating in her chest like a warning. "There," Sam said, pointing to a gap in the cliff face. It was barely visible, hidden by a tumble of boulders and seaweed. The opening was narrow, just wide enough for them to squeeze through, and the air coming from it was cold and damp, carrying that same sour smell. Ellie hesitated, her heart pounding. "Sam, this is a bad idea," she said, her voice shaking. "We don't know what's in there." He turned to her, his face serious. "We have to know, Ellie. If we don't, the whispers will never stop." She wanted to argue, but the hum was louder now, mixed with that faint choir of voices, singing in a language she didn't understand. It pulled at her like a thread tied to her heart. She took a deep breath and nodded, following him into the cave. The tunnel was tight, the walls slick with moisture and covered in those strange carvings, spirals, eyes, and lines that seemed to move in the flashlight's beam. The air grew colder the deeper they went, and the hum turned into a pulse, steady and strong, like the island was breathing. Ellie's skin prickled, her flashlight shaking as she followed Sam's light. The tunnel opened into a chamber, its walls glittering with wet stone. In the center was a pool of black water, so still it looked like glass. Above it, the ceiling was carved with a massive spiral, its lines studded with tiny, glowing crystals that pulsed like stars. The voices were louder here, not a choir anymore, but a single, deep song that made Ellie's head ache. "Sam, look," she whispered, pointing her flashlight at the pool. The water reflected the spiral above, but it wasn't just a reflection there. Were shapes in it, moving like shadows under the surface. Tall, thin, with arms that bent wrong, their eyes glowing like the crystals. Sam stepped closer, his notebook open, sketching the spiral. "This is it," he said, his voice awed. "The heart of the island." The book was right. Ellie grabbed his arm, pulling him back. "Don't get too close," she said, her voice sharp. "Those things in the water, they're the same as the shadows in the fog." He looked at the pool, his face pale but curious. "They're not attacking us," he said. "Maybe they're just watching." The song grew louder, the voices weaving together into a sound that wasn't human, wasn't anything Ellie could name. It filled the chamber, echoing off the walls, making her feel small and exposed. The shapes in the water moved faster, their eyes locked on her, and for a moment she thought she heard her name, sung in that terrible voice. "Sam, we need to go," she said, her voice breaking. "Now." He nodded, but before they could move, the ground shook, a low rumble that made the pool ripple. The crystals in the ceiling glowed brighter, and the shapes in the water rose, not fully breaking the surface, but close enough that Ellie could see their outlines, long, thin bodies with too many arms, their faces a blur of eyes and teeth. She screamed, grabbing Sam's hand and running back through the tunnel. The song followed them, growing into a wail that wasn't the scream but close, shaking the walls around them. Rocks fell, blocking parts of the tunnel, and Ellie's flashlight flickered, the beam weak and unsteady. They stumbled out onto the beach, gasping, the sea roaring behind them. Old Tom was there, his boat ready, his face grim. "You're lucky," he said as they climbed in. "Most don't come back from the caves." The boat sped away, the island fading into the dark. But the song stayed with Ellie, ringing in her ears, and the shapes in the water haunted her, their eyes burning in her mind. Sam was quiet, his notebook clutched tight, but she could see the fear in his face, mixed with that stubborn spark. "We found it," he whispered, more to himself than to her. "The heart of the island." Ellie didn't answer. She didn't want to know what they'd found. All she knew was that the island was awake now, and its song was calling them back, louder than ever. Chapter 6. The lighthouse that never burns. Ellie's hands still trembled as she sat in the inn's cramped kitchen, the taste of salt and fear lingering in her mouth. The song from the caves clung to her, a low hum that pulsed in her chest even now, hours after they'd escaped the island. She hadn't slept, couldn't sleep, not with those shapes in the water haunting her dreams, thin with eyes like glowing coals. Sam was across the table, his notebook open, his pencil scratching as he copied more symbols from the old book. He looked tired, his face pale, but his eyes were bright, like the island was fueling him. "You're gonna drive yourself crazy," Ellie said, her voice rough. She sipped cold tea, trying to steady her hands. "We can't keep going back, Sam. Those things in the cave, they saw us." Sam didn't look up. "I know," he said, his pencil pausing. "But we're close, Ellie. The caves, the circle, the song, it's all connected." The book mentioned a lighthouse on the island. "It says it's part of the ritual, like a guide or something." A lighthouse, Ellie frowned, trying to remember. She'd seen the cliffs, the stones, the twisted trees, but no lighthouse. There wasn't one. We'd have seen it. Sam flipped to a page in the book, pointing to a faded sketch. It showed a tall, crooked tower on a cliff, its top dark, no light shining. The caption was in that spidery handwriting, "The lighthouse. That never burns. It's hidden," Sam said. "The book says it only shows itself when the island wants it to. It's supposed to point the way to the ritual's final step." Ellie's stomach twisted. "You're saying the island decides when we see it? That's insane, Sam. This whole thing is insane." He met her eyes, his face serious. "You heard the song, Ellie. You saw those things in the water. You know, it's not just a story. The island's alive, and it's talking to us. We have to listen." She wanted to scream, to tell him to burn the book and forget the island, but the hum in her chest stopped her. It was faint now, but it was there, like a heartbeat she couldn't ignore. The whispers came at night, her name woven into that eerie song, and the shadows from the cave followed her into her dreams. "What if we find this lighthouse and it's worse?" she asked, her voice small. "What if it's another trap?" Sam's jaw tightened. "Then we'll be careful, but we can't stop now. The book says the lighthouse holds the key to the ritual, maybe the words we need to say, or how to use the blood. If we can figure it out, we can stop the whispers." Ellie didn't believe it would be that simple, but she was tired of fighting him. The island was in her blood now, just like Eldersby said. She couldn't run from it, not anymore. "Fine," she said, standing up. "But if we see those shadows again, I'm done. I mean it." Sam nodded, but she could tell he wasn't listening. His mind was already on the island, chasing the lighthouse that didn't burn. They waited until night, when the village was silent and the fog was thin. Old Tom was at the docks, his boat rocking in the dark water, his face as grim as ever. "You're gonna regret this," he muttered as they climbed in. "That island don't give up its secrets easy." Ellie ignored him, her heart pounding. As the boat cut through the sea, the island loomed out of the darkness, its cliffs sharp against the starry sky. The air was cold, carrying that sour smell of rot, and the hum was there, faint but growing. Like the island knew they were coming. They landed on the beach, the footprints still there, fresh and deep, like something had been waiting. Ellie's flashlight caught them, and she froze, her breath catching. "Sam, look," she whispered, pointing. "They're everywhere." He crouched, his flashlight sweeping over the sand. The prints were long and thin, with too many toes, crisscrossing the beach like a pack of things had been circling. "They're fresh," he said, his voice tight. "We need to move fast." They followed the cliff path, avoiding the stone circle. This time, Sam said the book mentioned a trail to the lighthouse, hidden near the northern cliffs. The wind howled, tugging at Ellie's jacket, and the hum grew louder, mixed with that faint choir of voices. She kept her flashlight low, afraid to see what might be hiding in the dark. The trail was narrow, winding along the cliff's edge, the sea crashing below. Ellie's boots slipped on the wet rocks, and her heart raced every time the wind carried. A whisper, her name, soft and cold, like it was coming from the waves. Sam stopped suddenly, pointing his flashlight at a gap in the cliff. It was a narrow path, almost hidden by twisted bushes, leading to a rocky outcrop. "There," he said, his voice excited. "That's where the lighthouse should be." Ellie followed, her stomach churning. The path opened onto a small plateau, and there it was, a tower, tall and crooked, made of black stone that seemed to drink the light. Its top was dark, no beacon shining, just a hollow opening like an empty eye. The hum was louder here, pulsing in the air, and the voices were clearer, singing in that strange, not human language. "It's real," Sam whispered, stepping closer. "The lighthouse that never burns." Ellie grabbed his arm. "Don't," she said, her voice shaking. "It doesn't feel right." But Sam was already moving, his flashlight sweeping over the tower's base. The stone was carved with spirals and eyes, like the ones in the circle and the caves, but these were deeper, sharper, like they'd been cut with claws. The door was open, a black gap that seemed to swallow the light. The voices came from inside, louder now, pulling at Ellie's thoughts like a tide. "We need to see what's in there," Sam said, his voice low. "The book said the lighthouse holds the ritual's words." Ellie's heart pounded, but she followed him, her flashlight shaking. The inside of the lighthouse was cold and damp, the walls slick with moisture. The floor was carved with a massive spiral, its lines glowing faintly, like the crystals in the cave. The voices were everywhere, filling the air, making Ellie's head ache. They weren't just singing now, they were chanting words she didn't understand but felt deep in her bones. At the center of the spiral was a stone pedestal, smooth and black like the table in the circle. On it was a single object, a small, cracked mirror, its surface cloudy but shimmering with a strange light. Sam reached for it, but Ellie grabbed his hand. "Don't touch it," she said, her voice sharp. "Look at it." The mirror's surface rippled, and shapes moved in it, tall, thin, with too many arms, their eyes glowing like the stars. Ellie's breath caught, her flashlight flickering. The chanting grew louder, and the shapes in the mirror turned, their eyes locking on her. She felt a pull, like the mirror was trying to drag her inside. "Sam, we have to go," she whispered, her voice breaking. But before he could answer, the ground shook, and the chanting turned into a scream, not the island scream, but something closer, angrier. The shapes in the mirror moved, their arms reaching out, breaking the surface like it was water. Ellie screamed, pulling Sam back as the lighthouse shook, dust falling from the ceiling. They ran, the scream chasing them, the voices weaving into a wail that made Ellie's ears ache. The path back to the beach was a blur, their flashlights bouncing, the sea roaring below. Old Tom was waiting, his face grim as they scrambled into the boat. "You're fools," he said, starting the motor. "That lighthouse don't show itself for nothing." The island faded into the dark, but the scream followed, faint but sharp, like a needle in Ellie's mind. She looked at Sam, his face white, his notebook clutched tight. He hadn't grabbed the mirror, but she knew he'd seen it. Toother shapes, the eyes, the pull of something that wasn't human. "We need that mirror," he whispered, his voice shaky but determined. "It's part of the ritual." Ellie didn't answer. She didn't want to think about the lighthouse, the mirror, or the shapes that had stared at her. But the song was still there, humming in her chest, and she knew the island wasn't done with them yet. Chapter 7. Echoes of a forgotten ritual. Ellie's heart still raced as she sat in the inn's dim kitchen. the memory of the lighthouse's mirror burning in her mind. Those shapes, tall, thin, with eyes like fire, had stared right through her, like they knew her secrets. The song from the island was louder now, a constant hum in her chest that made her feel like she was drowning. She hadn't slept, couldn't sleep, not with the whispers calling her name every time she closed her eyes. Sam was across from her, his notebook open, his pencil scratching furiously. He looked worse than ever, his face pale, his hands shaky, but his eyes were lit with that stubborn fire. "You saw it, Ellie?" he said, not looking up. "The mirror, it's the key. The book said the ritual needs something to focus the words, something to hold the watcher's gaze. That's gotta be it." Ellie's stomach twisted. "You're not seriously thinking about going back for that thing," she said, her voice sharp. "Those shapes, Sam, they were coming out of the mirror. You saw them." He paused, his pencil hovering over the page. "I know," he said, his voice quieter, "but we're running out of time. The whispers are getting worse, and the song in my head all the time now. We have to finish this, or it'll never stop." Ellie wanted to argue, to tell him to throw the book into the sea and forget the island, but the hum in her chest stopped her. It was like the island was inside her, pulling her back no matter how hard she fought. "What's the plan, then?" she asked, her voice tired. "Go back, grab the mirror, and what? Say some creepy words, and hope we don't die." Sam flipped to a page in the old book from the library, its pages yellow and brittle. "The ritual's clearer here," he said, pointing to a passage in that spidery handwriting. "It says you stand in the stone circle at midnight, under a new moon, with a drop of blood and the eye of the watchers. That's the mirror. You say the words, and it either opens the gate or closes it. If we do it right, we can stop the whispers, the song, everything. And if we do it wrong," Ellie asked, her throat tight. "Eldersby said, the watchers don't forgive." Sam's face was grim. "Then we make sure we don't mess it up. I've been practicing the words. They're hard, but I think I've got them. We just need the mirror." Ellie shivered, the memory of the lighthouse's cold, damp air creeping over her skin. And how do we get it without those things grabbing us? They weren't just shadows. Sam, they were alive. He didn't answer right away, his eyes fixed on the book. "We go during the day," he said finally. "The book says the watchers are weaker when the sun's up. Maybe the mirror won't be as active." Ellie didn't believe it, but she was out of ideas. The island was in her blood now, its song weaving through her thoughts, its whispers calling her back. She couldn't run, not anymore. "Okay," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "But if we see those things again, I'm out. I mean it." Sam nodded, but his eyes were already on the island, like he could see it through the inn's walls. They spent the day preparing, packing flashlights, a knife, and a small bottle for the blood. Sam insisted it was just a drop, but Ellie's stomach churned at the thought. The village was quiet, the fog thinner than usual, but the air felt heavy, like a storm was coming. They found old Tom at the docks, his boat ready, his face as grim as ever. "You're dumber than I thought," he said as they climbed in. "That lighthouse ain't a place for kids. You won't come back the same." Ellie ignored him, her heart pounding as the boat cut through the sea. The island appeared through the haze, its cliffs jagged and dark, the sour smell of rot hitting her nose. The sun was low, casting long shadows across the beach, but it didn't make the place feel any safer. The footprints were there, fresh and deep, crisscrossing the sand like a warning. They followed the path to the lighthouse. The hum in the air, faint but steady, like a heartbeat. The tower loomed ahead, its black stone drinking the sunlight, its empty top staring down like a blind eye. Ellie's skin prickled as they approached, the memory of the mirror's shapes making her want to run. The door was still open, a black gap that seemed to pull at her. "Stay close," Sam whispered, his flashlight sweeping the ground. The carvings on the walls glowed faintly. Even in the daylight, their spirals and eyes watching them. The hum grew louder, mixed with that faint choir of voices, singing in a language that made Ellie's head ache inside. The lighthouse was colder than she remembered, the air thick with damp and rot. The spiral on the floor shimmered, and the pedestal stood in the center, the cracked mirror still there, its surface cloudy but glowing with that strange light. The voices were clearer now, chanting words that felt like knives in Ellie's mind. Sam stepped forward, his hand reaching for the mirror. "We grab it and go," he said, his voice shaky but determined. Ellie grabbed his arm. "Wait," she whispered, "look at it." The mirror's surface rippled, and the shapes were there, Argental, thin, with too many arms, their eyes glowing like the crystals in the cave. They didn't move, but they were watching, their gazes heavy and cold. Ellie's heart pounded, her flashlight shaking. "Sam, don't," she said, her voice breaking, but he was already reaching, his fingers brushing the mirror's edge. The chanting stopped, and the air went still, like the world was holding its breath. Then the mirror flashed a burst of light that made Ellie's eyes sting. The shapes moved, their arms reaching out, breaking the surface like it was water. Ellie screamed, pulling Sam back as the lighthouse shook, the spiral on the floor glowing brighter. "Run," she shouted, dragging him toward the door. The voices roared, not a song anymore, but a scream, sharp and angry, shaking the walls. The shapes didn't follow, but their eyes stayed on her, burning through the mirror as they stumbled out into the daylight. They ran, the scream chasing them down the path, the hum pulsing in their chests. The beach was a blur, their boots slipping. On the rocks, the sea roaring beside them. Old Tom was waiting, his face grim as they climbed into the boat. "You didn't get it, did you?" he said, starting the motor. Sam shook his head, his face white, his notebook clutched tight. "It's alive," he whispered. "The mirror writs part of them." Ellie didn't say anything. She could still feel the shape's eyes, there, gazes like knives in her back. The island faded into the haze, but the scream lingered, fainter but sharp, echoing in her head. She looked at Sam, his hands shaking, his eyes still burning with that stubborn fire. "We need that mirror," he said, his voice low. "It's the only way to finish the ritual." Ellie's heart sank. She knew he was right, but the thought of going back, of facing those shapes again, made her want to scream. The island was calling, its song louder than ever, and she knew they couldn't ignore it much longer. Chapter 8. The hunger of the deep void. Ellie's hands shook as she sat in the inn's dim kitchen, the memory of the lighthouse's mirror like a splinter in her mind. Those shapes tall, thin, with glowing eyes and arms that twisted like snakes had, reached for them, their presence heavy and cold, like the air before a storm. The island's song was louder now, a constant hum that pulsed in her chest, weaving through her thoughts like a thread she couldn't cut. She hadn't slept, couldn't sleep, not with the whispers calling her name. Sharp and hungry, every time she closed her eyes. Sam was across the table, his notebook open, pages filled with sketches of the mirror, the spiral, and the creepy symbols from the lighthouse. His face was pale, his eyes red and tired, But he was still scribbling, like the island was driving him forward. "We need that mirror," he said, his voice low but firm. "It's the only way to finish the ritual." Ellie's stomach twisted. "Are you crazy?" she snapped, slamming her mug down. "You saw what happened, Sam. Those things in the mirror, they were coming for us. We're not going back." He looked up, his eyes burning with that stubborn spark. "We have to, Ellie. The whispers, the song, they're not gonna stop. You feel it too, don't you? The island's in us now." She hated that he was right. The hum was there, steady and deep, like a heartbeat she couldn't escape. The whispers came every night, her name sung in that eerie, not human voice, pulling her back to the island. "So what's the plan?" she asked, her voice tired. "We grab the mirror and hope those things don't eat us." Sam flipped to a page in the old book from the library, its pages brittle and yellow. "There's more about the ritual here," he said, pointing to a passage in spidery handwriting. "It says the mirror is the eye of the watchers, a way to see them and talk to them. But it also says there's a price. The ritual needs blood, words, and something else. It calls it a piece of the heart." Ellie's skin prickled. "A piece of the heart? What does that mean?" "We're not cutting out our hearts, Sam." He shook his head, but his face was grim. "I don't think it's literal. Maybe it's like a sacrifice. Something we care about. The book's not clear, but it says the watchers are hungry. They want something from us. Hungry." Ellie's voice rose, and she lowered it, glancing at the door. "Sam, this is getting worse. First blood, now this. What if the watchers want us?" He didn't answer, his eyes fixed on the book. "We need to try," he said finally. "The book says the ritual can close the gate, stop the whispers. But we need the mirror, and we need to do it right." Ellie wanted to argue, to tell him to burn the book and run, but the hum in her chest stopped her. It was like the island was alive inside her, its song pulling her back to the lighthouse, to the mirror and its glowing eyes. "Fine," she said, her voice barely a whisper, "but we're not doing the ritual yet. We get the mirror, and that's it." Sam nodded, but his eyes were already on the island, like he could see it through the walls. They spent the day preparing, packing flashlights, the knife, and a small cloth to wrap the mirror fey. They could even touch it. The village was quiet, the fog thin but heavy, like it was waiting for something. Ellie's heart pounded as they walked to the docks, the sea hidden in the haze. Old Tom was there, his boat rocking in the dark water, his face grim as always. "You're asking for trouble," he said as they climbed in. "That mirror ain't meant for you." Ellie ignored him, her stomach churning as the boat cut through the sea. The island loomed out of the fog, its cliffs sharp and black, the sour smell of rot hitting her nose. The sun was gone, the sky dark with clouds, and the hum was there, steady and strong. Like the island was awake and waiting. They landed on the beach, the footprints fresh and deep, crisscrossing the sand like a warning. Ellie's flashlight caught them, and she froze, her breath catching. "Sam, they're everywhere," she whispered. He nodded, his flashlight sweeping the ground. "We stick to the plan," he said, his voice tight. "Get to the lighthouse, grab the mirror, get out." They followed the path to the lighthouse, the hum growing louder, mixed with that faint choir of voices, singing in a language that made Ellie's head ache. The tower loomed ahead, its black stone drinking the starlight, its empty top staring down like a blind eye. The door was open, a black gap that seemed to pull at her. the voices chanting inside. Ellie's heart pounded as they stepped into the lighthouse, the air cold and damp, the spiral on the floor glowing faintly. The pedestal stood in the center, the cracked mirror still there, its surface cloudy but shimmering with that strange light. The voices were louder now, not a song but a chant, words that felt like needles in her mind. Sam stepped forward, his hand reaching for the mirror. "We grab it and go," he said, his voice shaky but determined. Ellie grabbed his arm. "Wait," she whispered, her flashlight shaking. The mirror's surface rippled, and the shapes were there tall thin, with too many arms, their eyes glowing like fire. They were closer now, their outlines sharper, their gazes heavy and hungry. "Sam, they're watching us." He froze, his hand hovering over the mirror. The chanting grew louder, and the air felt thick, like it was pressing down on them. "Have to," he said, his voice barely audible. "It's the only way." Before Ellie could stop him, he grabbed the mirror. The lighthouse shook, the spiral on the floor glowing brighter, the voices turning into a scream mocked the islands. Scream, but something deeper, hungrier. The shapes in the mirror moved, their arms reaching out, breaking the surface like it was water. Ellie screamed, pulling Sam back as the mirror flashed. A burst of light that made her eyes sting. The shapes didn't come out, but their eyes stayed on her, burning with a hunger that made her feel small and helpless. The scream faded, but the hum was louder, pulsing in her chest like a second heartbeat. Sam clutched the mirror, wrapped in the cloth, his face white but triumphant. "We got it," he whispered, his voice shaking. "Let's go." They ran, the scream echoing in the lighthouse, the voices chasing them down the path. The cliffs seemed to lean closer, their carvings glowing faintly, like the island was awake and angry. The beach was a blur, their boots slipping on the rocks, the sea roaring beside them. Old Tom was waiting, his face grim as they climbed into the boat. "You're fools," he said, starting the motor. "That mirror's gonna cost you." The island faded into the dark, but the hum stayed with Ellie, stronger now, like the mirror, was singing its own song. She looked at Sam, his hands shaking as he held the wrapped mirror, his eyes still burning with that stubborn fire. "We have it," he said, his voice low. "Now we can do the ritual." Ellie didn't answer. The shape's eyes were still in her mind, their hunger like a weight on her chest. She knew the island wasn't done with them, and the mirror was only the beginning. The hum was louder, the whispers sharper, and she felt the deep void of the island calling, hungry for something she didn't understand. Chapter 9. Faces woven in the mistily clutched the edge of the inn's kitchen table, her knuckles white, the mirror's weight heavy in her mind, even though it was wrapped in cloth and tucked in Sam's backpack. The hum from the island was louder now, a constant pulse in her chest, like a heartbeat she couldn't silence. The whispers had grown sharper, her name woven into a song that wasn't human, calling her back to the island every time she closed her eyes. She hadn't slept, couldn't sleep, not with the memory of those shapes in the mirror, tall, thin, with glowing eyes and arms that reached like they wanted to pull her into the dark. Sam sat across from her, his notebook open, the mirror beside it, still wrapped but radiating a cold that made Ellie's skin prickle. His face was pale, his eyes red from staring at the old book all night. Its spidery handwriting and creepy drawings spread out like a map to a nightmare. "We're so close," he said, his voice low but buzzing with excitement. "The mirror, the blood, the words, we've got almost everything for the ritual." Ellie's stomach churned, and the peace of the heart. she asked, her voice sharp. You still don't know what that means, Sam. What if it's something we can't give? He looked down, his fingers tracing a sketch of the spiral. With eyes, I think it's a sacrifice, he said, his voice quieter. Not like killing something. Maybe something we care about, something personal. The book's not clear, but it says the Watchers need to feel our intent. Intent, Ellie snapped, standing up. Sam, those things in the mirror weren't just watching, they were hungry. You saw their eyes. They want us. Sam's face tightened, but he didn't argue. I know, he said, but we can't. Stop now, Ellie. The whispers, the song, they're getting worse. You feel it too, don't you? The island's not gonna let us go. She did feel it. The hum was in her bones, the whispers in her dreams, and the shapes from the mirror haunted her every thought. She wanted to run, to leave the village and never look back, but the island was like a hook in her heart, pulling her back to the stone circle, the caves, the lighthouse. So what's the plan? She asked, her voice tired. We do the ritual, and hope we don't die. Sam flipped to a page in the book, pointing to a passage. It says the ritual has to happen in the stone circle at midnight under a new moon. That's tomorrow night. We need the mirror, a drop of blood, and the words. I've been practicing them, they're weird, but I think I can say them right. Ellie's heart raced. And the sacrifice. What are we giving up? Sam didn't answer right away, his eyes fixed on the wrapped mirror. I don't know, he said finally, but we'll figure it out. We have to. Ellie didn't like it, but she was out of fight. The island was in her blood, its song louder than ever, and the whispers were relentless, calling her name in the dark. Fine, she said, her voice barely a whisper, but we do this careful, no mistakes. Sam nodded, but his eyes were already on the mirror, like it was calling him too. They spent the day preparing, checking the words in the book, packing flashlights, the knife, and a small vial for the blood. The village was quiet, the fog thicker than ever, curling around the houses like it was alive. Ellie's heart pounded as they walked to the docks at dusk, the sea hidden in the mist. Old Tom was there, his boat rocking, his face grim. You're out of chances, he said as they climbed in. That mirror's trouble. You bring it back here, you're bringing the island with you. Ellie ignored him, her stomach twisting as the boat cut through the fog. The island loomed out of the mist, its cliffs black and jagged, the sour smell of rot hitting her nose. The hum was there, strong and steady, like the island was waiting. The beach was covered in footprints, fresh and deep, crisscrossing the sand like a warning. Ellie's flashlight caught them, and she froze, her breath catching. Sam, they're worse, she whispered, pointing. Like a whole bunch of those things were here. He nodded, his flashlight sweeping the ground. We stick to the plan, he said, his voice tight. Get to the circle, do the ritual, get out. They climbed the path to the stone circle, the fog thick and cold, the hum pulsing in their chests. The voices were there, faint but growing, singing in that eerie language that made Ellie's head ache. The stones loomed ahead, their carvings glowing faintly, like eyes watching from the dark. Ellie's heart pounded as they stepped into the circle. The air colder, heavier, like it was pressing down on them. Sam set the mirror on the black stone table in the center, unwrapping it carefully. Its surface was cloudy, but it shimmered with that strange light, and Ellie swore she saw movement in its shapes, tall and thin, their eyes glowing. The voices grew louder, not a choir, but a chant. Words that felt like knives in her mind. "Ready?" Sam asked, his voice shaking. He held the knife and the vial, his eyes fixed on the mirror. Ellie nodded, her heart racing. "Just do it," she said, her voice barely audible. Sam pricked his finger, letting a drop of blood fall into the vial. He handed the knife to Ellie, and she hesitated, her hand shaking. The hum was deafening now, the voices chanting faster, the shapes in the mirror moving closer. She pricked her finger, wincing as a drop of blood joined Sam's in the vial. He poured it onto the stone table, the red soaking into the black. He opened his notebook, reading the words from the book, his voice stumbling over the strange syllables. The air grew colder, the fog thicker, and Ellie's flashlight flickered. The shapes in the mirror were clearer now, their arms reaching out, their eyes burning with hunger. The chant rose, and the fog swirled, forming shapes' faces, woven in the mist, their mouths open in silent screams. "Sam, stop," Ellie shouted, grabbing his arm. "Something's wrong." But he kept reading, his voice louder, the words echoing in the circle. The ground shook, the stones leaning closer, their carvings glowing brighter. The faces in the mist moved, their eyes locking on Ellie, their mouths forming her name. The mirror flashed, a burst of light that made her eyes sting, and the shapes inside reached out, their arms breaking the surface. Ellie screamed, pulling Sam back as the circle shook. The chant turning into a scream knot, the island's scream, but something deeper, hungrier. The faces in the mist closed in, their eyes glowing like the shapes in the mirror. Sam dropped his notebook, the mirror still on the table, its light pulsing like a heartbeat. "Run," Ellie shouted, dragging him out of the circle. The scream followed, the faces in the mist chasing them, their voices weaving into the hum. The path to the beach was a blur, their flashlights bouncing, the sea roaring below. Old Tom was waiting, his face grim as they climbed into the boat. "You didn't finish it, did you?" he said, starting the motor. Sam shook his head, his face white, the mirror left behind. "We couldn't," he whispered. "It was too much." The island faded into the fog, but the scream lingered, sharp and hungry, echoing in Ellie's head. The faces in the mist were still there, burned into her mind, their eyes watching, waiting. She knew the ritual had failed, and the island was angry, its hunger growing stronger. Chapter 10. The altar of shattered dreams. Ellie's hands shook as she sat in the inn's kitchen. The memory of the stone circles screamed clawing at her mind. The faces in the mist, foes' glowing eyes and gaping mouths haunted her there. Silent cries echoing alongside the island's hum, which pulsed in her chest like a second heartbeat. She hadn't slept, couldn't sleep, not with the whispers growing sharper, her name sung in a voice that wasn't human. The failed ritual had left her raw, like the island had reached inside her and twisted something loose. Sam was across the table, his notebook open but untouched, his face pale and drawn. The old book from the library lay beside it, its pages yellow and tattered, mocking them with its secrets. The mirror was still on the island, left on the stone table when they'd run, and Ellie could still feel its pull, like a thread tied to her soul. "We messed up," she said, her voice rough. "We tried the ritual, and it made things worse, Sam. Those faces, they weren't there before." Sam's eyes were dull, the stubborn spark gone for the first time. "I know," he whispered, his fingers tracing the edge of the book. "I thought we had it right, the blood, the words. But we're missing something. The peace of the heart. We didn't give it. Ellie's stomach churned. And what if it's something we can't give? Like our lives, Sam. You saw those things in the mist. They wanted us. He didn't answer right away, his gaze fixed on the book. The book mentions an altar, he said finally, his voice low. Not the stone table in the circle, but something else, deeper on the island. It calls it the altar of shattered dreams. It's where the ritual has to end. Ellie's skin prickled. Another altar. Sam, we barely got out of the circle alive. You want to go looking for some creepy altar now? He looked up, his eyes tired but determined. We don't have a choice, Ellie. The whispers, the song, they're louder now, aren't they? You feel it too. The island's not gonna let us go until we finish this. She hated that he was right. The hum was stronger, a constant pulse that made her head ache, and the whispers were relentless, weaving her name into that eerie song. The faces in the mist were in her dreams now, their eyes glowing like the shapes in the mirror. So what's this altar? She asked, her voice small. What does it do? Sam flipped to a page in the book, pointing to a sketch of a low, jagged stone platform surrounded by twisted trees. The caption read, "The altar of shattered dreams, where the heart is given." It says the altar is where the watchers take their price, he read. The piece of the heart, it's not just a sacrifice. It's something that matters to you, something you can't get back. Ellie's heart raced. Like what? Our memories, our family. Sam, this is too much. He shook his head, but his face was grim. I don't know, but we need the mirror, and we need to find the altar. If we do the ritual right this time, we can close the gate. Stop the whispers, the faces, everything. Ellie wanted to run, to leave the village and never look back. But the island was in her blood, its song pulling her back to the circle, the caves, the lighthouse. Fine, she said, her voice shaking. But we're not doing the ritual until we know exactly what we're giving up. No more mistakes. Sam nodded, but his eyes were already on the book, like he was halfway to the island. They spent the day preparing, checking the words again, packing flashlights, the knife, and a new vial for the blood. The village was quiet, the fog thick and heavy, curling around the houses like it was alive. Ellie's heart pounded as they walked to the docks at dusk, the sea hidden in the mist. Old Tom was there, his boat rocking, his face grimmer than ever. You're out of your minds, he said as they climbed in. That altar's no place for kids. You go there, you're giving the island what it wants. Ellie ignored him, her stomach twisting as the boat cut through the fog. The island loomed. Out of the mist, its cliffs black and jagged, the sour smell of rot hitting her nose. The hum was there, strong and steady, like the island was awake and waiting. The beach was covered in footprints, fresh and deep, crisscrossing the sand like a warning. Ellie's flashlight caught them, and she froze, her breath catching. Sam, they're worse, she whispered, pointing. Like those things are waiting for us. He nodded, his flashlight sweeping the ground. We find the altar, get the mirror, do the ritual, he said, his voice tight. No stopping. They followed a new path, one the book described as winding through the island's heart, past the stone circle and deeper into the twisted trees. The hum grew louder, mixed with the faint choir of voices, singing in that eerie language that made Ellie's head ache. The fog was thick, curling round the trees like fingers, and the air felt heavy, like it was pressing down on them. The path opened into a clearing, and there it was, a low stone platform, jagged and black, surrounded by trees that looked like they were screaming, their branches twisted into faces. The altar was carved with spirals and eyes, glowing faintly in the dark, and the mirror was there, sitting in the center, its surface shimmering with that strange light. The voices were louder now, chanting words that felt like knives in Ellie's mind. "This is it," Sam whispered, stepping closer. "The altar of shattered dreams." Ellie grabbed his arm. "Don't," she said, her voice shaking. "Look at it, Sam. It's wrong." The mirror's surface rippled, and the shapes were there, tall, thin, with glowing eyes and too many arms, their gazes heavy and hungry. The fog swirled, forming faces again, their mouths open in silent screams, their eyes locked on Ellie. The chant rose, and the altar glowed, its carvings pulsing like a heartbeat. Sam pricked his finger, letting a drop of blood fall onto the altar. He handed the knife to Ellie, and she hesitated, her hand shaking. The hum was deafening, the faces in the mist closing in, their eyes glowing. She pricked her finger, wincing as a drop of blood hit the stone, soaking into the black dot. Sam opened his notebook, reading the words, his voice stumbling over the strange syllables. The air grew colder, the fog thicker, and the mirror flashed, its light pulsing with the chant. The shapes inside moved, their arms reaching out, breaking the surface. Ellie's heart pounded, her flashlight shaking. "Sam, we need to stop," she shouted, grabbing his arm. "It's not working." But he kept reading, his voice louder, the words echoing in the clearing. The ground shook, the trees screaming louder, their faces twisting in the fog. The shapes in the mirror were closer, their eyes burning with hunger. Ellie screamed, pulling Sam back as the altar glowed brighter. The chant turning into a scream, not the island's scream, but something deeper, hungrier. The faces in the mist surged forward, their mouths forming Ellie's name. She dragged Sam away, the mirror still on the altar, its light pulsing like a heart. They ran, the scream chasing them, the fog thick with faces, their eyes glowing like stars. The path to the beach was a blur, their flashlights bouncing, the sea roaring below. Old Tom was waiting, his face grim as they climbed into the boat. "You didn't finish it," he said, starting the motor. "You left the mirror." Sam nodded, his face white, his hands shaking. "We couldn't," he whispered. "It wanted too much." The island faded into the fog, but the scream lingered, sharp and hungry, echoing in Ellie's head. The faces in the mist were still there, burned into her mind, their eyes watching, waiting. She knew the ritual had failed again, and the island was angrier, its hunger growing stronger. Chapter 11. Cosmic tides and broken skies. Ellie's breath came in short gasps as she sat in the inn's kitchen. The memory of the altar's scream searing her mind. The faces in the mist, their glowing eyes and gaping mouths followed her, their silent cries blending with the island's hum, which thumped in her chest like a trapped bird. She hadn't slept, couldn't sleep, not with the whispers now a constant wail, her name sung in a voice that clawed at her soul. The failed ritual at the altar had broken something, made the island angrier, hungrier. She felt it in her bones, like the sea itself was pulling her back. Sam sat across from her, his notebook closed for once, his hands gripping the edges of the table. His face was pale, his eyes hollow, the stubborn spark dimmed by fear. The old book from the library lay beside him, its pages silent but heavy with secrets. The mirror was still on the island, left on the altar when they'd run, and Ellie could feel its pull like a hook in her heart. "We messed up again," she said, her voice raw. Those faces, Sam, they were closer this time. They knew us. Sam nodded, his fingers trembling. I know, he whispered. The ritual. We're still missing the piece of the heart. The book said it's not just blood or words. It's something deeper, something the Watchers want. Ellie's stomach twisted. What's deeper than blood? She asked, her voice shaking. Our lives, our memories. What do they want, Sam? He didn't answer, his eyes fixed on the table. The book mentions one last place, he said. Finally, his voice low. The cliffs where the sea meets the sky. It calls it the edge of the world, where the cosmic tides break. It's where the ritual has to be finished, where the Watchers are closest. Ellie's heart raced. Another place? Sam, we barely got out of the altar alive. Those faces, they weren't just watching. They were coming for us. He looked up, his eyes tired but stubborn. We can't stop now, Ellie. The whispers, the song, they're louder, aren't they? You feel it too. The island's not gonna let us go until we end this. She hated that he was right. The hum was a roar, now shaking her from the inside, and the whispers were relentless, her name woven into a song that made her head ache. The faces in the mist haunted her dreams, their eyes glowing like the shapes in the mirror. So what's at the cliffs? She asked, her voice small. What's the cosmic tides? Sam opened the book, pointing to a sketch of a cliff, jutting into the sea, waves crashing against it under a sky full of swirling stars. The caption read, "The edge of the world, where the tides of the void meet the earth." It says the cliffs are where the Watcher's power is strongest, he read. The ritual has to end there, with the mirror, the blood, and the peace of the heart. If we do it right, we can close the gate. And if we do it wrong, Ellie's throat tightened. The book said the Watchers don't forgive. What if we give the wrong thing? Sam's face was grim. Then we lose everything. But we have to try, Ellie. The island's awake now, and it's hungry. Ellie wanted to run, to leave the village and never look back. But the island was in her blood, its song pulling her. Back to the cliffs, the altar, the mirror. Okay, she said, her voice barely a whisper. But we need to know what the peace of the heart is. No more guessing. Sam nodded, but his eyes were already on the book, like he was halfway to the cliffs. They spent the day preparing, checking the words again, packing flashlights, the knife, and a new vial for the blood. The village was silent, the fog thick and heavy, curling around the houses like a living thing. Ellie's heart pounded as they walked to the docks at dusk, the sea hidden in the mist. Old Tom was there, his boat rocking, his face grimmer than ever. "You're done for," he said as they climbed in. "Those cliffs ain't a place for the living. You go there, you're giving the island what it wants." Ellie ignored him, her stomach churning as the boat cut through the fog. The island loomed out of the mist, its cliffs black and jagged, the sour smell of rot hitting her nose. The hum was there, strong and steady, like the island was awake and waiting. The beach was covered in footprints, fresh and deep, crisscrossing the sand, like a warning. Ellie's flashlight caught them, and she froze, her breath catching. "Sam, they're everywhere," she whispered, pointing. "Those things, they know we're coming." He nodded, his flashlight sweeping the ground. "We find the cliffs. Get the mirror, do the ritual," he said, his voice tight. No stopping. They followed a new path, one the book described as leading to the northern cliffs, where the sea roared loudest. The hum grew louder, mixed with the choir of voices. singing in that eerie language that made Ellie's head ache. The fog was thick, curling around the twisted trees, and the air felt heavy, like it was pressing down on them. The stars above were wrung, swirling like water in a drain, their light bending in ways that hurt to look at. The path opened onto a cliff that jutted into the sea, waves crashing against it with a roar that shook the ground. The air was cold, the hum deafening, and the voices were clearer, chanting words that felt like knives in Ellie's mind. At the cliff's edge was the mirror, still wrapped in its cloth, somehow moved from the altar to here, its surface shimmering with that strange light. The footprints were all around, deep and fresh, like a crowd of things had gathered. "This is it," Sam whispered, stepping closer. "The edge of the world." Ellie grabbed his arm. "Don't," she said, her voice shaking. "Look at the sky, Sam. It's broken." The stars were swirling faster, forming shapes, faces, arms, eyes that glowed like the shapes in the mirror. The fog curled around the cliff, weaving into faces again, their mouths open in silent screams. The chant rose, and the mirror glowed, its light pulsing with the hum. Sam pricked his finger, letting a drop of blood fall onto the cliff. He handed the knife to Ellie, and she hesitated, her hand shaking. The hum was deafening, the faces in the fog closing in, their eyes glowing. She pricked her finger, wincing as a drop of blood hit the stone. Soaking into the black dot, Sam unwrapped the mirror, its surface rippling with shapes, their eyes burning with hunger. He opened his notebook, reading the words, his voice stumbling over the strange syllables. The air grew colder, the fog thicker, and the sky broke, stars falling like rain, their light twisting into faces. Ellie's heart pounded, her flashlight shaking. "Sam, it's not working," she shouted, grabbing his arm. "The face is there, coming," but he kept reading, his voice louder, the words echoing in the fog. The ground shook, the cliff trembling, the waves roaring louder. The shapes in the mirror moved, their arms reaching out, breaking the surface. The faces in the fog surged forward, their eyes locked on Ellie, their mouths forming her name. She screamed, pulling Sam back as the mirror flashed, its light pulsing like a heart. The chant turned into a scream, deep and hungry, shaking the cliff. The stars fell faster, their light forming a spiral above, like the one in the caves. Ellie dragged Sam away, the mirror falling from his hands, shattering on the stone. The scream grew louder, the faces in the fog closing in, their eyes burning with hunger. They ran, the scream chasing them, the fog thick with faces, their voices weaving into the hum. The path to the beach was a blur, their flashlights bouncing, the sea roaring below. Old Tom was waiting, his face grim as they climbed into the boat. "You broke it," he said, starting the motor. "You've made it worse." Sam nodded, his face white, his hands shaking. "The mirror's gone," he whispered, "but the ritual's not done." The island faded into the fog, but the scream lingered, sharp and hungry, echoing in Ellie's head. The faces in the sky were still there, burned into her mind, their eyes watching, waiting. She knew the ritual had failed again, and the island was angrier, its cosmic tides pulling them back for one last chance. Chapter 12. The scream that silences Ellie's heart pounded as she sat in the inn's dim kitchen. The shattered mirrors scream echoing in her mind like a wound that wouldn't close. The faces in the fog, those glowing eyes and gaping mouths haunted her, their silent cries blending with the island's hum. now a deafening roar in her chest. She hadn't slept, couldn't sleep, not with the whispers screaming her name in a voice that tore at her soul. The broken mirror had unleashed something, made the island hungrier, angrier, like a beast waking from a long sleep. She felt it in her bones, pulling her back to the cliffs, to the cosmic tides and the broken sky. Sam sat across from her, his notebook closed, his hands clenched into fists. His face was pale, his eyes hollow, the stubborn spark gone, replaced by a fear that mirrored her own. The old book from the library lay beside him, its pages silent but heavy, mocking them with their failure. The mirror was gone, shattered on the cliff, but its power lingered, like a ghost in her thoughts. "We broke it," she said, her voice raw. "The mirror's gone, Sam. The ritual's over. We're done." He shook his head, his voice barely a whisper. "It's not over, Ellie. The island's still calling. You hear it, don't you? The hum, the whispers, they're worse now." She did hear it. The hum was a storm in her chest, shaking her from the inside, and the whispers were a scream, her name woven into a song that made her head ache. The faces in the fog were in her dreams, their eyes glowing like the stars that had fallen. "So what do we do?" she asked, her voice trembling. "The mirror's gone. We don't have the peace of the heart. The Watchers won't let us close the gate." Sam opened the book, his hands shaking as he flipped to a final passage, one they'd overlooked before. It was written in that spidery handwriting, the words jagged and urgent. "It says there's one last chance," he read, his voice low. "The ritual can be finished without the mirror, but it needs everything else: blood, words, and the peace of the heart. It has to happen where the island's voice is loudest, where the scream began." Ellie's stomach twisted. "Where the scream began. That's the stone circle, Sam. We already tried there, and it failed. Those faces, they'll be waiting." He nodded, his face grim. "I know. But the book says the circle is the heart of the island, where the Watchers first came through. If we do it right this time, we can close the gate for good. But we need to know what the peace of the heart is." Ellie's heart raced. And what if it's us? What if the Watchers want our lives? Sam didn't answer, his eyes fixed on the book. "It's not our lives," he said finally. "It's something we love, something that hurts to give up. The book says the Watchers feed on pain, on loss. That's what they want." Ellie's throat tightened. "Like what? Our memories? Our family? Sam, this is too much." He looked up, his eyes wet with tears. "I think it's the book," he said, his voice breaking. "This whole thing started when I found it. It's what's driving me, what's pulling us to the island. If we give it up, burn it in the circle, maybe that's the sacrifice." Ellie stared at him, her heart sinking. The book was Sam's obsession, the thing that had kept him going through all this. Giving it up would break him, but she knew he was right. The island wanted something that hurt, something that mattered. "Okay," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "But if this doesn't work, we're done. No more island." Sam nodded, but his eyes were already on the book, like he was saying goodbye. They spent the day preparing, memorizing the words, packing flashlights, the knife, and a new vial for the blood. The village was silent, the fog thick and heavy, curling round. The houses like a living thing. Ellie's heart pounded as they walked to the docks at dusk. The sea hidden in the mist. Old Tom was there, his boat rocking, his face grimmer than ever. "This is your last trip," he said as they climbed in. "The island's awake now. You don't come back from this." Ellie ignored him, her stomach churning as the boat cut through the fog. The island loomed out of the mist, its cliffs black and jagged, the sour smell of rot hitting her nose. The hum was there, a deafening roar, and the whispers were a scream, her name echoing in the dark. The beach was covered in footprints, fresh and deep, crisscrossing the sand like a warning. Ellie's flashlight caught them, and she froze, her breath catching. "Sam, they're waiting," she whispered, pointing. "Those things, they know we're here." He nodded, his flashlight sweeping the ground. "We go to the circle, do the ritual, end this," he said, his voice tight. "No stopping." They climbed the path to the stone circle, the fog thick and cold, the hum shaking the ground. The voices were there, screaming now, singing in that eerie language that made Ellie's head ache. The stones loomed ahead, their carvings glowing brightly, like eyes watching from the dark. Ellie's heart pounded as they stepped into the circle, the air colder, heavier, like it was pressing down on them. Sam set the book on the stone table in the center, his hands shaking. "This is it," he said, his voice breaking. "The peace of the heart." Ellie nodded, her heart racing. "Do it," she said, her voice barely audible. Sam pricked his finger, letting a drop of blood fall onto the table. He handed the knife to Ellie, and she hesitated, her hand shaking. The hum was deafening, the screams of the voices weaving into a storm, the fog swirling with faces, their eyes glowing. She pricked her finger, wincing as a drop of blood hit the stone. Soaking into the black dot, Sam opened his notebook, reading the words, his voice stumbling over the strange syllables. The air grew colder, the fog thicker, and the stones glowed, their carvings pulsing like a heartbeat. The faces in the fog closed in, their mouths open in silent screams. Their eyes locked on Ellie. Sam held the book over the table, his hands trembling, and dropped it, letting it fall onto the stone. "I'm sorry," he whispered, striking a match. The flame caught the pages, and the book burned, its smoke curling into the fog. The screams grew louder, not just the voices, but the island itself, a sound that shook the ground and tore at Ellie's ears. The faces in the fog surged forward, their eyes burning with hunger. "Keep going," Ellie shouted, grabbing Sam's arm as he faltered, the words catching in his throat. The fire spread, the book crumbling to ash, and the scream became a wail, deep and final, silencing the voices. The fog cleared, the faces vanishing, and the stones went dark, their carvings fading. The ground stopped shaking, the hum gone, the air still. Ellie's heart pounded, her ears ringing with the silence. She looked at Sam, his face white, tears streaming down his cheeks as he stared at the ashes of the book. "Did it work?" she whispered, her voice shaking. He nodded, his voice barely audible. "It's over." They ran, the path to the beach a blur, their flashlights bouncing, the sea roaring below. Old Tom was waiting, his face grim but surprised. "You did it," he said, starting the motor. The island's quiet. The island faded into the fog, and for the first time, the hum was gone, the whispers silent. Ellie's heart was still racing, but the weight was lifted, the island's pull gone. She looked at Sam, his face empty. The loss of the book, a wound she knew would stay with him. They didn't speak as the boat cut through the sea, the village lights faint in the distance. The island was behind them, its scream silenced, but Ellie knew they'd carry its mark forever, a shadow in their hearts where the book had been.